What are client-side redirects and how do I implement client-side redirects for SEO? So before I dive into talking about client-side redirect methods, let me take a step back and talk about how client-side redirects compare to server-side redirects. With a server-side redirect, the browser or robot from a search engine makes a request to a server for a URL that happens to redirect. The server receives that request and responds to that request, letting the browser or robot know that the URL they've requested does redirect and also sends along where to redirect to. So it's a much simpler process. The request is made and the server responds with those instructions for processing the redirect. A client-side redirect adds an additional step. With a client-side redirect, the browser or robot makes a request for a URL that happens to redirect. The server responds to that request, letting the browser or robot know that everything is okay with this URL. This URL doesn't redirect as far as the server knows, and that's what it communicates to the browser or robot. So the server then also sends along code back to the browser or robot with the redirect instructions. And now the browser or robot have to process that client-side code in order to see the redirect. This is why client-side redirects aren't the recommended option. When and where you can, you should use server-side redirects on your website. Server-side redirects are simpler and they're more dependable. When it comes to client-side redirects, though, sometimes you have to use those. You can't implement a redirect on your server for one reason or another, or it's just too hard to get that redirect configured. So if you have to use a client-side redirect, you have two choices. You can either process the client-side redirect in a meta tag, or you can use JavaScript. Now, the first method we have available is a meta refresh. A meta refresh redirect is implemented in a meta tag. And the meta tag looks like this. So you can see in this code, we have meta HTTP equiv equals refresh. That indicates that this is a meta refresh tag. We then have the content attribute. And the content attribute contains two pieces of information. The first piece of information is a numerical value. This is the refresh delay. In this case, this is set to 0. So this refresh delay is instantaneous. There is no delay with this. We then have URL equals, and this is the page that we're redirecting to. Now, you can change this numerical value to be content equals 1 instead of content equals 0. This adds a delay to the refresh, so the refresh won't be processed for about 1 second after the page is loaded. Google uses this numerical value to determine what type of redirect this is. A 0 indicates this is a permanent redirect, where a 1 indicates this is a temporary redirect. If you're familiar with a 301 and a 302 status code, a 0 is equivalent to a 301 status code sent by a server-side redirect, and a 1 is the equivalent of a 302 redirect sent by a server-side redirect. Now, when implementing a meta refresh redirect, you want to make sure this is placed as high in your HTML code as possible. Ideally, it should be the first element added in your website's head code. That way, it's the very first thing that the browsers or robots will process on the page. If you're able to place that up pretty highly in your code, that will also avoid any disruptions that could prevent browsers or robots from being able to process this. If you're able to place a meta refresh tag high in your website's HTML code, it's going to be pretty reliable, and there's going to be very little risk that browsers or robots will be unable to process this redirect. The other option we have along with the meta refresh redirect is a JavaScript redirect. Now, JavaScript redirects are the least dependable option that we have. So if you are unable to use a server-side redirect and you're unable to use a meta refresh redirect, then your only option is going to be implementing the redirect with JavaScript. So with JavaScript, we have two different methods we can use to process the redirect. Window.location.href is one common option that you'll see. And with window.location.href, you state the URL that you want to redirect to, and Google, for their part, tends to follow this pretty reliably so long as they can execute that JavaScript code. Like with the meta refresh, try and keep this as high in the HTML code as possible, so that way it's the very first thing that browsers or robots see, and if it's the first thing that browsers or robots see, it should be the very first thing that browsers or robots execute on this page. You don't want a bunch of other code to be processed and executed first, which would slow down their ability to see this redirect and make it harder for them to be able to reliably process this redirect. Now, the one catch to window.location.href is that it adds the URL to the browser's history. So if you hit the back button, you'll go back to the page that contained window.location.href, the page that redirected you somewhere else. This can create a bit of a frustrating user experience. So typically you don't want to use window.location.href. Instead, you want to use window.location.replace. This works very similarly in terms of how the code is implemented. You say window.location.replace, and then you state your URL. And then when you implement this redirect, here again, browsers and robots will see this code, they'll process it, but the difference is they won't put it in the browser's history. This is typically treated very similar to how Google will treat a server-side redirect. So if you have to use JavaScript redirects, I would suggest using window.location.replace as your method. Again, to recap, server-side redirects are going to be the most dependable because there's just fewer steps involved in the process. But with client-side redirects, there's that additional step where not only does the browser or robot have to make the request from the server, not only does the server have to send something back in response to that request, but browsers or robots also have to execute code with this. Meta refresh redirects are the simplest client-side method you can use and the most reliable, but if you can't use those, then you can use JavaScript with window.location.replace, or less preferably, window.location.href. If you have any questions about implementing client-side redirects or need help with other aspects of technical SEO, please let me know. You can email me at matthew@elementive.com. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it from Elementive, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.